Hello everybody. So in this video we're going to talk about the concept of a bridge too far. And this is regards to an owner operator being on the spot market. For me, I'm perfectly comfortable being an independent contractor. Um, I've thought about going on the spot market, and someday I might go on the spot market, but not right now. To me it's a bridge too far. And what that means is that you can, bite off more than you can chew. You want to look before you leap. You hear all these phrases, and the bridge too far is like that as well. It's a reference to a movie. I think it was in the 1970s, and it was a World War II movie, and it was about the Allies being overconfident, and they tried to take more territory than they could handle at the time, and they met a lot of resistance. So you can imagine that could happen to you as an owner operator. You're doing perfectly fine as an independent contractor, and then you say, okay, well, I'm gonna dip my toe into the spot market and try that. That may be a bridge too far. It's like you were successful being leased on with a big box carrier, like I am with Crete. But once you go on the spot market, different ball game. And you may not be ready for it. Doesn't mean you would never do it, but you don't want to do it until you know for sure you're going to be ready for it. I think you need experience as an owner operator. I think you need excellent credit. I think you need to have little no debt. Um, I think you need to have a lot of money saved, because what happens on the spot market is the rates go up, okay, and it turns into a gold rush. Guys rush in. They're like, the rates are good. Let's jump in. And as more guys jump in, it's supply and demand. Now the supply of truck capacity grows up, then the rates come down. So when there's very few players, the rates go up. More players jump into the game, the rates go down. And it's extremely volatile. It's very risky. And if you're not able to withstand the financial changes in spot market rates, then don't even try. It's like if your business model is based on $2.50 per mile on the spot market, and the rates come crashing down to $1.80 per mile, is that going to put you out of business? It's like you really got to think about that. It looks great, and I mean, ultimately, that's like the best thing, right? Is to have your own small business. You're going to be on the spot market. You're going to pick and choose your loads. You're going to make, great money, things like that. And it sounds wonderful. It sounds like every owner operator's dream to make a lot of money on the spot market. Um, I've heard a lot of bad stories, a lot of bad stories. And to me, that was the bridge too far. It was like know your limits. It's like, do you really need to go on the spot market to be successful? And I would say no. I mean, you don't need to be an owner operator to be successful. You could be successful as a company driver. I think as you become an owner operator, you take on more risk. You go on the spot market, you're taking on the ultimate risk. And if you are not financially stable or secure, and I mean, you got to have deep pockets. You got to have. I wouldn't even entertain going on the spot market unless I had at least $150,000 saved, because, like I said, those rates look great until they don't. When they don't, they really come down fast. I mean, there's like little or no warning. I mean, it's like one month the rates are really good, and the next month they're in the toilet. And if you don't have the financial strength to withstand it, I mean, it could wreck you. Because you gotta have your trailer. Not only do you have to own the tractor, you gotta own the trailer or lease a trailer. And you're gonna have to pay for your own insurance. Your overhead is going to be much higher than it is if you're on a leased on with a big box carrier. Things are manageable when you have the support of the big box carrier. It's not impossible. I mean, there's lots of guys that go on the spot market. Lots of guys get their own authority. I see them go. They go both ways. They go on the spot market when the rates are up, and then they come back to the big box carrier when the rates are down. They're constantly going back and forth and back and forth. So I would say, you should have very good experience before you try to go on a spot market. A lot of guys think that Landstar is a good stepping stone to go on the spot market because the way they're structured is that you got to negotiate within Landstar for your rates. So that gets you into the practice of negotiating for loads. Rather than say like Crete, you don't negotiate loads at Crete. They send you 3 load offers. You just pick which one you want. You're not negotiating rates at Crete. You're not necessarily negotiating rates at Schneider either. They have a load board, and you just got to pick which loads you want off the load board. Probably something very similar at Mercer. I think Landstar is the only place that you're really going to be negotiating. So like Landstar, it would be, if you're interested in going on a spot market, Landstar might be a good stepping stone. It's like, look, before I go on a spot market, let me see if I can make it at Landstar. If you can make it at Landstar, then that will help prepare you for the spot market. But I've seen many times that, guys jump from leased on with a big box carrier to get their own authority, go on a spot market, don't like it, come back to the big box carrier. It's like they get in that spot market and then they realize that was either bad timing or a bad mistake. And I always thought, that for me personally, I just never really interested in the spot market. It's like, yeah, it sounds great in theory, but there's no stability there. It's if I want to make money, I take the money I have, I control the costs, I save my money, I invest my money, and I grow my business. But I know, what my overhead is, and I know what my gross revenue is going to be, and my net income is. It's very manageable when you're on with a big box carrier. You have definite feel for what things cost, and you can manage it. You get on that spot market, and it's the wild west. It's varies so much that it's unpredictable. It's contract freight's predictable. There's a certain amount of reliability you get with contract freight. You get on that spot market, anything goes. So you hear awful stories. Get double brokered loads, and then they don't get paid for the loads they hauled, and then they're doing factoring where they are paying. They're paying to get paid, basically. They lose some of the money that they would have made on that load, but they don't want to wait until it's actually paid out. So sometimes the terms of the load is you got to wait 30 days to get paid. That's awful. That's terrible. So I think you can go on the spot market. You could be successful, but I would suggest you get as much experience as you can, leased on with a big box carrier, and have a lot of money. I mean, a lot of money. This isn't something you're going to start out as an owner operator and go on the spot market. It's like that's almost 100% guaranteed to fail. So but I wouldn't do it until I was comfortable doing it. And you're probably looking at 10 years experience as an owner operator before jumping into the spot market. By then you have a pretty good idea about how truck repairs go, and the equipment, and you've had an opportunity to save money and build your credit. These guys who jump in the spot market right off the get-go, I mean, they're almost destined to fail. You hear that guys on spot market say no to cheap freight. Why are guys hauling cheap freight? Well, because they're desperate. They got to make that truck payment. They got to cover that overhead, and they don't have the financial strength to say no to cheap freight. And that hurts. That hurts everybody when they haul cheap freight. I understand. I try to pay attention to how things go on the spot market. Sometimes you haul a load to get to a better geographical area where you can get a higher paying rate. So like if you're in middle of nowhere, Minnesota, you might take cheap freight to get to Chicago, and then Chicago you get paid good freight. So then on average, you average the two loads, and you're like, okay, well, I can make my truck pay, I can make this work. But there's a lot of, it's unlimited competition on that spot market. The thing with the spot market too is these are the leftover loads. Really, these are the loads that they could not get the big box carriers to haul. For whatever reason, maybe there wasn't enough drivers available. Maybe there was nobody in that area. Maybe they were paying so cheap that the big box carriers declined the load. And so the loads on the spot market are many times, not always, but many times, it's the leftover loads. It's so that they'll throw it on the spot market, and you'll see who's desperate enough to haul it. And you come in, and you've got your KPIs, your key performance indicators all figured out. You know what your overhead is. You come in, you're like, I got to get $2 per mile, and you bid on a load, and then some poor bastard so desperate he bid $1.50 for that load, $1.50 per mile, and it's like, I couldn't do it. If I took that load, I'd have to file bankruptcy if I kept running loads at a low price. And this is what you face when you're on the spot market. When you're faced with such low rates, you're better off being at least on a big box carrier. That's why I always thought, for me personally, I thought, going on the spot market was my kind of like my limit. That'd be a bridge too far. I'm not ready to take on that kind of risk. Now, someday, when my pockets are deeper and I want more challenge or more control, I'll be like, yeah, I think I'm ready. I'm willing to go on the spot market and do that. Maybe towards the end of my driving career. That might be very, very interesting. I might enjoy it. But you got to think about maintenance on that trailer too. You think about downtime for maintenance on your tractor. You're going to have downtime for maintenance on that trailer. Now you own two pieces of equipment. You're adding complexity to your business model. If you're a reefer driver, it's very, very expensive to buy your own reefer trailer, and it's got another motor that you're going to have to maintain. It's just like having an APU on your truck. Everyone wants an APU until the damn thing doesn't work. You spend more time fooling around with that APU. It's like, it's not worth it. Sometimes it's like, it's great when it runs, but when it doesn't run, it really is quite the headache. I think it's interesting to network with other owner-operators and learn from their experience. And the guys that have been on the spot market, sometimes they have the best experience, and then they'll tell you, it's like, well, you got to try it and see it for yourself, because a lot of guys talk, and it's one of those things where it's like, I got to see it to believe it. And then you try it and you see what it's all about, and maybe you're just curious more than anything else. And it's like, well, You know, in theory, spot market sounds great. You know, it really does, in theory. And these guys will often tell you, you know, work smarter, not harder. You know, what that means for them is they're going to sit at a truck stop rather than driving, and they're going to be on the phone negotiating with brokers looking for a load. And they in their mind, you know, they're not wrong. It's just their personal preference. To them, that means they're working smarter, not harder. Other guys rather be driving than spending all their time on the phone with brokers. You know, it's like, well, you know, you like you like negotiating, I like driving. You know, so you know, 80% drop and hook sounds real good to me. I don't have to fool around with all those other people. You know, that's I don't want to have to wait to get paid either. You know, I don't have the financial reserves that I can go 30 days without getting paid. You know, and I don't like the idea of factoring where, you know, you're basically selling that load that you just completed to some financial operation so that you can they'll take a cut and then so you can get paid. You know, it to me it's tough. You know, when you look at these small trucking companies, they have like 5 to 10 trucks. They're on the spot market for the most part. They're on the spot market. They're not big enough to get contract freight, so they're running on the spot market. And you know, they're so far in debt. You know, these small trucking companies, there's mom and pop operations that you know they have 10 trucks. You know, each truck probably costs them at least $100,000. You know, so that's like $1 million in equipment. And they got 10 drivers, and each one of those drivers is going to make, you know, somewhere around $60,000 to $80,000 a year. You know, there's another $1 million. You know, and they got a couple $1 million per year operation. It sounds great until those rates come down, and then guess what? All them drivers get laid off. All that equipment gets repossessed, and those small companies file for bankruptcy. You know, because they're too exposed to the fluctuations of the spot market. And you know, it sounds great. You know, like they say, oh, the rates are good. It really is. It's like a gold rush. It's you know, when the rates go up to 250 per mile or higher, it's a gold rush. You got drivers. You know, it attracts owner operators. They jump in. And then the rates crash, and then they jump out. You know, it's like I think you would have more stability as an independent contractor. Um, you may come a time you may want to try going on in the spot market, but I would save that towards the end of your driving career when you're strong, when you're very, very strong, when you have excellent credit. You know, you got financial reserves you can fall back on. And when the rates go down, it's like you're not sweating it. It's fine. You can handle it. It's these guys who are so tightly budgeted on a certain rate per mile. If those rates go down, they're in trouble. You know, so to me, for now, it's a bridge too far. That could change. It could definitely change, but it would be based on how much money I have. I wouldn't do it until I had a lot of money. I mean, a lot of money. I mean, I don't think I would do it until I had at least $200,000 saved. You know, and then it's be like, well, now I want to try it, and you know, try it. So it's like, you know, you may like it, you may not. I think you could do just as well as an independent contractor if you save your money and you invest it in individual brokerage account, IRA, you know, something like that. I often make money off my investments. You know, I subscribe to a stock picking service called Seeking Alpha, and they give me 2 stock picks per month. And I've had some stocks go 200% return on investment, others 25% return on investment. You know, so I can make money by investing it in the stock market. And you can make money investing in real estate. You can make money in collectibles. You don't have to go on the spot market. The spot market is very, very risky. So we'll see. Yeah, if I ever do it, it'll be when I'm perfectly comfortable with rates going up and down. I'm not there yet. Maybe someday maybe someday I'll just be so damn comfortable doing what I'm doing. It's like I have no incentive to go on the spot market. All right, guys, that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the internet.